We did some modelling based on discussions with pharma companies and discussions with academics in the field, and really, I think this shows it quite starkly. If you were a company doing some fairly kind of standard forecasting about your market for a new antibiotic, you couldn't predict a return of profit until year 23 of the patent life, which, as a commercial proposition, is a very, very difficult one to find attractive. I think the reasons for this are many and varied, and they've been studied quite a lot and get talked about in quite a bit of detail, but I think essentially it comes down to the fact that really antibiotics, a new antibiotic coming to market, it faces a lot of competition from a great number of very, very cheap generic products that are out there. For most patients, they'll still be very effective, they'll still be used as first-line treatments. And so a new product to market would only be held back and used as a reserve of the most difficult to treat patients. And for a drug maker who's trying to predict a profitable market, that's really not an attractive position to be in. So one of the things we've been advocating around and trying to talk to policymakers and making the case to policymakers around the world is that there needs to be some sort of kind of major intervention to support antibiotic development and reinvigorate the discovery activities in this space to make sure that we have a proper supply of new drugs for the future. And very briefly, we recommend the threefold approach. So firstly, we need to pump around the pipeline to get more and more money going into early stage R&D. Maybe that's from public funders, maybe that's from charitable foundations like the Gates Foundation or the Wellcome Trust. Maybe it's from industry itself, but really there needs to be a much greater amount of funding going into early stage drug discovery. Secondly, there's still more to be done to make the drug development process much more streamlined and straightforward for product developers. So that's about regulation, that's about sharing information, making it much easier to bring good products to market. And finally, there's a need to fundamentally change the way that antibiotics are reimbursed and to change the way that we create incentives for companies so that you can balance the need to control the use of antibiotics and have good drug stewardship with the need for a company and a developer to return profits. Another area we've looked at and we've been very excited by is the potential that there is for rapid diagnostics to really change the way that antibiotics are prescribed and the way we use them and to really cut back on unnecessary use. So we looked at some studies. This is an example of one study in the US that showed that for patients presenting in primary care with fairly nondescript respiratory symptoms, around 60% of the prescriptions given out would be inappropriate, so for viral illnesses. But that's something that could be relatively easily dealt with by a new rapid point-of-care diagnostic that could help doctors rapidly make more informed prescribing decisions. But again, that's an area that isn't commercially attractive. The technology's there, or it is available in the near future, but really it's a difficult area for companies to do business, and it's difficult to create a market when actually we're talking about trying to guide decisions that are made very quickly by doctors based on empirical prescribing, and are actually only decisions around prescribing antibiotics that cost a matter of pence in many instances. We've also looked in more recent papers at a couple of areas where there's more fundamental possibilities to reduce the way that, or to reduce the demand for antibiotics and to reduce the incidence of infections for which antibiotics might be rightly or wrongly prescribed. So last month we published a paper looking at vaccines and making the case that really we need to be thinking about vaccines and the potential that new products in that area could have in terms of reducing the burden of infections that require antibiotics. And of course, often the elephant in the room in many of these discussions is the use of antibiotics in animals. In many areas of the world, I think the UK is probably better than many countries, but it's still not perfect. In many areas of the world, antibiotics are used kind of far too profitably in animals. In the US, for instance, there's still very, very widespread use of antibiotics for growth promotion, so to increase the rate at which animals are fattened up for slaughter. And really that's something which, for us, creates a kind of a significant risk, an unacceptable risk in terms of developing resistance in humans and increasing the risks of body-resistant infections. So that's a very quick gallop through our work. There's more on our website. All of our reports are on there, and our infographics are available online if they're of interest. So our next steps. As I mentioned, we're a 2-year project that's now entering its final months. We're committed to delivering a final report to the Prime Minister by the summer of this year, and that will be, like I said, a package of recommendations across the whole field. So really talking about how on a global level, on a globally coordinated basis, governments can come together to start tackling AMR in a coherent and cohesive way. sorry, I should also touch on, and I nearly skipped over it, one of the kind of the final theme-based papers, last but very much not least, next month we'll be publishing a paper on infrastructure and infection control. Obviously very relevant to many of you here today. It's not going to be looking to go into the technical aspects of it, so the kind of the technical and the science behind infection control, but really it's about looking at what the commercial, the incentive barriers are to, or policy barriers are to best practice being adopted to prevent the spread and development of infections in a community setting, in a care setting, and also how better surveillance can change the way that we kind of keep tabs on the development of drug resistance and change the way that we tackle the emergence of drug-resistant infections around the world. So finally, once we have all our reports out, the final stage of our work is around building consensus and building support for further action on this around the world. I think we have a really kind of exciting moment politically in terms of the level of high-level support we have around the world for this. The Prime Minister here has been very vocal on the issue and is very, very much behind it personally. We know that in the US, President Obama has taken interest in drug resistance, and Angela Merkel in Germany. All of this means that we have great opportunities in terms of the G20 group of countries, the G7 group of countries, and even now the UN General Assembly, all gearing up to be talking about AMR and talking about how the world can act together to really tackle this threat. So hopefully we'll be able to see some real dividends and some real progress on that in the coming months, and we'll be able to really help the world come together and try and tackle the threat. My time's nearly up, so thank you very much.